Imagine you're trying to log into your bank account. Your first step is probably to type in your password. And if you're smart, the second step is probably to put in the little code that your bank texts you. It's annoying, it slows you down, but at least it stops some guy who's living in his mom's basement from using your account to buy a Swedish penis pump enlarger.
I don't even know what this is. This sort of thing ain't my bag, baby.
For the last 60 years, the FDA has used their version of two-factor authentication when trying to approve new drugs. But as of last week, the FDA has decided that this process was too slow. So they're simply removing it. No more need for 2 pivotal trials. Just the one. Their goal is to make everything faster and more cost-effective, which might happen. But that guy living in his mom's basement, well, let's just say it is absolutely his bag, baby. But is this inherently bad? Or is there a world where less clinical regulation and more speed can actually be a good thing for the greater medical landscape? I'm Matty C, and this is Big Drama in Big Pharma. What's up, nerds? So here's the situation. On February 19th, 2026, the FDA Commissioner, Marty Makary, and head of the Biologics Division within the FDA, Vinay Prasad, wrote an article in the New England Journal of Medicine that the FDA, by default, will now only look for one well-controlled and adequately run clinical trial as the basis of its drug approvals. Makary and Prasad say that they're offering the industry more predictability and a chance to save money, which can then be passed on to consumers. Lower the cost of research and development, lower the cost of drug prices for the people. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's do a quick overview of what the clinical trial process actually looks like. After enough preclinical promise, test a new drug's mechanism and efficacy in a petri dish, in some mice, there are 3 main clinical in-human trials, named adequately as phase 1, 2, and 3. Phase 1 is the warm-up. This is just designed to make sure that the drug is not more toxic to humans than it is helpful. But phase 2 and 3, these are considered your pivotal clinical trials. These are the ones where pharma companies are trying to find what that dose is where it's actually effective in humans, where it's actually treating the disease without having those harmful side effects. The whole system's kind of set up like your favorite video game. You can only fight the boss if you've beaten every level before that, if you fought all the little minions to lead up to that boss. Except most new drugs are still probably less toxic than your teammates in ranked. And this 2-trial standard was started in the 1960s, where the last phase of development was designed to avoid a sponsor succeeding by chance. Statistically, 2 pivotal trials dramatically reduce the possibility of an error in finding a medication safe and effective. More on how stats play into this in a little bit. At first glance, a lot of analysts are really excited about this, improving the likelihoods of drugs ultimately getting over the line and or reducing late-stage development costs. And the logic is sound. Running a clinical trial is expensive and very time-consuming. So if you have to do less clinical trials, therefore reducing costs and reducing time, there is a lower barrier of entry to develop the next potentially groundbreaking medicine. This then allows drug developers to take that extra time and money and put it towards a new treatment. Maybe it's to treat a completely different disease, or maybe it's just a slightly different variation of the disease they're trying to treat right now. All right, sweet. Well, I guess that's the end of this video. Everything sounds good and perfect and not controversial, and I guess we'll see you in the next one. Not so fast. As much as there are many potential positives, there are equally as many potential negatives. But to understand why, we have to talk about the sexiest thing in science: statistics. In science, pretty much anything successful needs to have a p-value of less than 0.05. In the case of a clinical trial, that means there is a less than 5% chance that this drug's efficacy was due to some random noise. And you might be thinking that 1 in 20 sounds pretty safe, and it kind of is, but you've also probably seen enough gambling movies to know that it also happens a lot. This is why this 2-trial rule existed. The odds of winning the lottery is low, but the odds of winning the lottery twice in a row is 1 in 20. 1 in 400. A 1 in 400 chance that your new drug is fake good. Such low odds for false positives gives drug sponsors and, most importantly, patients much more confidence that their drug is actually working the way it's intended to. The other problems with this new guidance isn't that you're just fighting the luck of the draw. You're also fighting the luck of the FDA. The FDA will still retain discretion to require additional studies when warranted. Whenever they want, the FDA can basically ask drug sponsors to provide certain confirmative evidence. And at first, this might sound like a really good contingency. The FDA will only make you do one of the really expensive, really time-consuming trials, and you can buff up the rest of your application with other non-clinical trial data. But honestly, this is just bait. Confirmative evidence is like getting your news from a YouTube comment section. Trust me, bro. It can be the same drug that was used in humans, but in a totally different disease. Or it can be from in vivo studies, basically saying, hey, it worked in lab rats, so clearly it's gonna work in Grandpa Jim. It's using data as proof in a clinical scenario that doesn't make any sense to that drug. What's funny is drug sponsors have been able to provide vibes-based evidence since 1997. That's right, since the 1900s, the US law actually only requires one pivotal clinical trial plus confirmatory evidence. But in the last 30 years, there have been pretty much zero approvals using that system. Why? Because when they've tried in the past, it has gone horribly. I'd like to introduce Bitopertin, one of the best known examples of don't believe every clinical trial you read on the internet. Bitopertin was this drug to treat schizophrenia, which you probably know as this chronic brain disorder where symptoms include hallucinations, delusions, and back in the day, researchers noticed that people with schizophrenia had lower amounts of this neurotransmitter called glycine. So Roche made this drug called Bitopertin, which was designed to increase the availability of glycine in the synapse, or the connection between nerve cells. Restore the amount of glycine available for neurons, restore regular brain function. Their first pivotal trial looked amazing. A 25% reduction in schizophrenia symptoms in patients who received the drug compared to those who received the placebo. But it's only phase 2. They then tested Bitopertin in 3 separate phase 3 trials. Double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled clinical trials. The highest standard of clinical trials you could do. They tracked the efficacy and safety of over 1,800 patients in their treatment journey for over a year. Bitopertin did not show any significant reduction in schizophrenia symptoms when compared to the placebo. Translation: after all of the hype of their first pivotal trial, the subsequent pivotal trial showed that Bitopertin was absolute buns. Thankfully, Bitopertin was tested under the old guidance, under the old rules. Because if they were tested under the new rules, Bitopertin would get approved, patients would take it, and most would find it absolutely useless. Roche would still make billions of dollars. And look, I can hear you typing, okay? I am not being a hater and just nitpicking one example. I'm selecting the most well-known example from an FDA report put out in 2017, where they outline 22 examples of drugs that had a really good phase 2 trial and a really shit phase 3. It's not even the potential lack of efficacy that scares me the most. It's the personal bias within the FDA. The authors of the new guidelines, Marty, Makary, and Vinay Prasad, have been giving me whiplash this year in the way that they've been going back and forth on their decisions for FDA approvals. They claim that one trial is actually safer, but shifting to one trial is actually inconsistent with their recent FDA rejections that previously cited a need for additional evidence. And there are 2 glowing examples of this in just the last few months: Unicure and Moderna. Both companies thoroughly followed the protocols that them and the FDA had agreed on, and both gathered all of the necessary clinical endpoints that the FDA wanted to see. But at the 11th hour, the FDA changed their mind and said they weren't going to accept their applications. I've got in-depth videos on both of those in the description below, but the point is this: if the FDA can't even accept the drugs that followed their protocol and gather the data that met their very specific standards, how can we trust their discretion with even less data? Makary and Prasad are constantly pushing how corrupt the pharma industry is and how there needs to be sweeping changes. Yet they're putting in new guidelines that are based on vibes and friendship. It's way less predictable. The truth is that science is slow for a reason. Real discovery is real hard. The best way to reduce financial burden is to introduce more well-defined guidelines, not loosening them up. Because when you try to hack the scientific method in order to save a few bucks, the only thing you end up breaking is trust. But hey, those are just my thoughts. And I'm just a guy with pasty skin and a genetic disposition to have man titties. You don't have to listen to me, but I'd still love to listen to you. Do you think these guidelines are going to be a game changer in one way or the other? Or maybe there's just going to be a nothing burger from the Nothing Men? Let me know down below. And don't forget to subscribe so we all see how this plays out together. But until then, thank you all for stopping by, and you stay classy, nerds.